Everyone. Hey, just so you'll know this one little thing, that is the last time you're going to ever see that clip again. All right. So for those of you who that's been very scary to you, you can come back. I promise you it won't be as scary moving forward. But this is the last week of our series, Just a Little Sin, and how it can make a huge difference. And starting next week, we're going to do a little 4-week series called Mixtape. Now, for some of you, you're too young to know what a cassette tape was. But does anybody here ever remember putting together a mixtape of like your greatest hits? You'd put it in, and then you'd hand it to someone you love and say, these are for you. Anyway, we're going to be doing a series called Mixtape. It's kind of just going to be a one-hit wonder kind of thing. And so hopefully you'll come back for that. Then my buddy Tony Wolf, who is a comedian who is traveling right now with Mercy Me and David Crowder. He's going to be here on July 7th. He is a great comedian, great storyteller, so you're going to be here for that. And then after that, we're starting a new series to kind of go through the middle and the end of summer called The Greatest Showman, so about the miracles of Christ. So anyway, we're really excited you're here today. Hope you continue to come back during the summer and go on this journey with us. Now, we're finishing up, as I said, that series, and we've been talking about just these little sins that we kind of cover over as if, they're not as big as the big sins. And today, I'm going to wrap it up with one that honestly you shouldn't think of as a little sin, because when you think about it, it made God's top 10 list. And when I'm talking about God's top 10 list, you know what I'm talking about, right? The Old Testament, the 10 Commandments. And so it's in the 10 Commandments, so you wouldn't think of it as being a little sin because, it's in that list. But what's interesting is it's number 10. And you kind of rattle through the 10 Commandments, and then we think of, killing, yeah, that's bad. Adultery, yeah, that's bad. Stealing from someone, yeah, that's bad. And then you get to number 10, and it's coveting. And it's kind of like, maybe you think, well, I don't have a problem with this one, I don't have a problem with this one, I don't have a problem with this one. Then you get to number 10, and it's coveting. And if we really knew what coveting meant, we'd be like, uh-oh. Because that is one that I think many of us struggle with. We all struggle with coveting, but the problem is I don't think we either see it as a sin, or maybe it's because we don't quite understand it. We don't really fear it or try our best to not do it. But if you look at Exodus chapter 20, verse 17, God says this: you must not covet your neighbor's house, you must not covet your neighbor's wife, male or female servant, ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. The Bible comes out very strong on the sin of coveting. As a matter of fact, if you look at the New Testament, Paul writes to the Romans in chapter 1, verse 28 and 29, and since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, in other words, he's talking about people who aren't acknowledging God, they're not following God's way, then God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. They were filled with all manners of unrighteousness, evil, covetousness, malice. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness, and they are gossips. So I want you to notice in that little laundry list of the things that they are, that coveting is right there in between murder and malice and all of these other things. Paul also talks about how in Ephesians chapter 5, he tells us that we need to be, if we're followers of Christ, we need to be imitators of God as beloved children and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, as a fragrant offering and a sacrifice to God. But sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not even be named among you, as is proper among saints. Let there be no filthiness, no foolish talk, nor crude joking, which are out of place, but instead let there be thanksgiving. For you may be sure of this, that everyone who is sexually immoral or impure or who is covetous has no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Now, I don't think we see the seriousness of what coveting is because, again, maybe we don't understand it. Maybe because when you stack it up against adultery and lying and murder, it just doesn't seem like a big deal. But if you look at what God has to say about the issue, and I don't know about you, but I still think God's opinion is the one that really matters, is when you look at what he has to say about it throughout his word, Old Testament, New Testament, letters that Paul wrote, coveting is a big deal. So what is it? Now, I want to just say that coveting is not the same as is not the same as desiring something. Just because you desire something, you really want something, doesn't necessarily translate to coveting. The 10th commandment does not forbid us to have desire or to think, I'd like to have something that's a little nicer or something that's a little better. Our problem is not that we desire things. Our problem is that we desire the wrong things, or we go about desiring the good things in the wrong way. You hear what I'm saying here? Our problem is the way we desire the wrong things, or we desire good things, but we just go about desiring them in the wrong way. You see, God doesn't say to us, shame on you for wanting things. What makes coveting sinful is not desire. What makes it sinful is desiring what someone else has. That's the issue with it. It isn't say, it'd be cool to have a nice house or a better job. That's not the problem. The problem is when it's like, I want his house. I want his job. Matter of fact, I'd like to have his kids. I'd like to have his wife. You see, now we've gone from just desire into coveting. And coveting is when you want someone else's stuff to become your stuff. And it's real easy, especially in this nation, when we're pursuing the American dream. It is real easy for us to go from consumers to coveters real fast. It is a real slippery slope of us wanting to consume things, to acquire things, things that we desire, to all of a sudden now having our eyes on other things that we desire that isn't even our stuff. It's someone else's stuff. So if you take a breakdown of Exodus 20 and put it in our context, when he says you shouldn't covet your neighbor's house, maybe some of the ways that we do that is say stuff like, it'd be nice to have nice things like they do. They got all the nice stuff. Everything they have is beautiful. I mean, they've upgraded everything. We live in a dump. You see how that desire is now shifted where I want what they have. You should not covet your neighbor's wife. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. But sometimes we could say, wow, she's beautiful. Why can't I have a wife that's aging like that? Or I wish I married someone like her, because if I married someone like her, then I'd be happier. Or maybe, why did I marry my husband? I mean, her husband's always so friendly, and look at how good he is around the kids, and he actually fixes things. My husband breaks everything he tries to fix. Why can't I have him? Or maybe we talk about that, we don't have male servants or female servants, and maybe some of you have an ox and donkey, but most of us don't. But when we say stuff like, it's not fair, because they get to go do all the cool vacations. I mean, they get to go to the Grand Canyon. They get to go to the beach. We're lucky if we have to go to grandma's house. We start to covet what they have. Why am I stuck at this job? Why aren't my kids more like their kids? Why aren't my parents more like their parents? Or we're not to covet anything that is our neighbor's. Well, I wish I could be smart like him or her. My life would be so much better if I could look like her. Why can't I have a normal family? Why can't I run like him, jump like him, throw like him, kick like him? Why is everything in my life so hard, but everything else seems to come so easy for them? I want their life. You see, that's the difference, that slippery slope of going from desiring to now I want stuff that's not my stuff. I want someone who's not mine to be someone. It's interesting. Every day, I get the opportunity to watch this play out in my home because I have these two killer dogs. And I mean, they are killers, Toby and Mac. And they are smaller than they appear on the screen, I'm just going to tell you. But what's interesting is every morning, I get to watch someone go from desire to coveting. And that is my dog Toby here. Because see, every morning, it is routine for us to always give them a treat. It's usually always the same treat, and they both get the same treat because we want to be fair. We would not want to cheat our dogs, right? So because we want to be fair, we give them the same treat. And so we do it with regularity. Very seldom do we forget that morning treat. And it's a chew, and so they chew on it a while. But here's the thing. Toby, who is like my dog, I love Toby. Toby always finishes first. He always chews through it first. Mac is slower about it, or sometimes he's just not in the mood, so he kind of puts it aside. But here's the thing. Because Toby finishes it first, you'll notice that somewhere in that process, when he's done, he'll kind of glance at Max. And then he'll glance again at Max. And then he'll get down and he'll move over and he'll kind of look out of the side of his eyes at Max. And then he'll look to see if I'm looking at him looking at Max. Then he'll get over on the cushion and he'll find a place where he can then hover right over Mac and watch Mac the entire time to see if Max ever walks away from it. And I want to tell you, he is like locked in, just waiting. You could almost see him salivating over Mac's treat, the same identical treat he just scarfed down in a minute or two flat. So then Toby is, because he's my dog, he's the smartest of the dogs, okay? Toby then will want to do stuff to distract Mac, to lure him away. Like sometimes he'll just come up and get on my lap as if, hey, Mac, when you want to, look at the view up here, you know, hoping that Mac will stop. Or sometimes, I'm not kidding, even though they just went out before they got their treat, he will go to the door and start yiping or acting as if they're squirrel, you know, to just lure Mac over to the window. So as soon as Mac leaves, then he runs over, pounces on that shoe, all like it's his own. Now I want to tell you, every morning I see this happen. And what I've observed in this, first of all, is I'm shocked that Toby is the one that goes from a healthy desire to a covetous canine in just a matter of seconds. Because I would expect that from Cindy's dog, Mac, because he's a heathen. But Toby is the one that I think is a great dog, and so I'm shocked by that. But here's the other thing. Every single day we provide them with this. Every single day it's going to happen the next day, and it's going to happen the next day. But Toby acts as if there will be no tomorrow. And I got to have it right now. And as his so-called owner, master, friend, you know, I'm a little insulted by that. Why are you acting this way? You're going to get another one. And I think when we covet, that's what we do to God. It's like we don't trust that he's going to take care of us. Everybody else gets something better than me. Why don't I get that? And so we covet. Or you know what? We want a faster car. I want his car. I want his house. I want his wife. I want his toys. And it's interesting because as children, it starts really young. It's something, again, that we start off with a desire for something, and before long it becomes a real unhealthy coveting of something. And as an example, there's actually been studies done that show children can recognize commercial logos by the time they're 18 months old. And a matter of fact, 93% of children recognize this one first, the Golden Arches. You know what I'm talking about? McDonald's, okay? They recognize McDonald's first. And there's a couple commercials, one you've seen, maybe one you haven't, maybe you haven't seen it. And I just want to show you these commercials, and we'll talk about that on the backside.
Beep, Bow made a list of every birthday wish. There was a pony, a seahorse, a new, a doll, paddle ball, and a hot air balloon. But when she started to see her friends and her family, she said, whoa, oh, 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 how happy can one girl be? How happy can one girl be?
Joy is a gift.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
This is the box it comes in.
Now, isn't that cute? I mean, first of all, that little baby in the rocking chair, that honestly was our daughter Becca. The first word other than dada that she ever said was McDodos, and she would point to McDodos. But then you look at the second little one, it's real cute because it talks about this list and how she makes this list, and she wants a pony and a seahorse and a new and a doll and a paddle ball too. And but here's the thing. But when she started to see her friends and her family, she said, whoa, oh, how happy could one girl be? How happy could one girl be? And then all of a sudden you're thinking, oh, you know, she finally gets it. It's not about those things. It's about her friends and family. And that's what you think she gets. But then no, this voice comes in and says, joy is a gift. And this is the box it comes in. You know, a Happy Meal box, right? So boys and girls, if your life is miserable, if you don't have the things that your friends have, if you're just having a bad day, all you need is a box called a Happy Meal, and you will be happy. And it'll take care of all your needs, and that is programmed in us from the time we were really little. So right now, if you're having a life where things just aren't going well, I'm just going to tell you, when you're done, go up on the hill and line up and get you a Happy Meal, because joy is a gift, and that box up there is what it's going to come in. And you will feel better until dinner time, all right? And then we'll see. One of my favorite authors, John Ortberg, says this about when you buy your kid a Happy Meal. He says, you're not just buying fries and McNuggets and a dinosaur stamp. You're buying happiness. He goes on to say, their advertisements have convinced my children that they have this little McDonald's-shaped hole in their hearts. As if they say, our hearts are restless till they find their rest in a Happy Meal. He says the problem with the Happy Meal is that the happy wears off and they need a new fix. No child discovers lasting happiness in just one. They don't say, remember that Happy Meal? What great joy I found there in that Happy Meal. He says Happy Meals bring happiness only to McDonald's. If you ever wonder why Ronald McDonald's wears that grin, it's because 99 billion burgers have been sold there. They're the only ones that are happy. But then Ortberg concludes, when we get older, we don't get smarter. Our Happy Meals just get more expensive. We want those things, and we think that joy is going to come in that box, or that joy is going to come in this. And then before you know it, not only do we go from desiring, but now we think our joy is going to be found in somebody else's box, in somebody else's life, in somebody else's stuff. And when that happens, now we have gone into what is known as coveting. And as we kind of established early on, God's opinion on that is it is a sin. It's a sin. And see, coveting is not only a sin, but here's the thing. It really impacts our lives negatively, not only spiritually, but it impacts our lives negatively. Because look at this. If you are someone who covets, it will wear you out. You will find yourself fatigued, exhausted, because have you ever noticed that the drive to stay up with the Joneses wears us out? Have you ever noticed that, man, the more you try to have what they have, the more you try to acquire what they acquire, the more you try to have their lifestyle, you realize how tired you get? Because in order to maybe reach the standard of their living that they're projecting, you got to work 2 jobs, maybe 3 jobs, or long, long hours in order to just keep up with them. If I'm going to have what they have, then I'm going to have to get at it. I'm going to have to figure out other ways to be able to acquire. And Proverbs 23:4 says, do not wear yourself out trying to get rich. Be wise enough to know when to quit. And there's a lot of us that would say we are worn out. We are tired. And I wonder how much of that we could trace back to coveting. Because we're putting all this pressure on ourselves to have that. I want that. I want what they have. Another thing is a coveting heart is going to lead you to debt. When we covet stuff, when it goes from desiring to coveting, then it will destroy our budget. If you have a budget, it will destroy it. As someone said, it isn't because we don't make enough money. Our issue is that we want too much. And I believe that is so true in this country. It isn't that we don't make enough. The problem is we want too much. If you ever traveled out of this country and went into even some of the regions of this country or to some of these third world countries, you would realize that you are in the 1% of the richest in the entire world. So it isn't that we don't have enough, we just want too much. And part of the reason we want so much is because I got to have that. I got to have what he has. I got to have what she has. And so we just drive ourselves more and more into debt. And the question is, do you really need it? Do you really need more? Do you need more and more stuff? And if you don't have the cash or you don't have the budget, but you got a credit card, hey, you know what? Let's get it. Because there's more money coming in later. We can pay for it later. As Dave Ramsey said, we buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't even like. That's coveting. It wasn't part of your plan. It wasn't something you needed. It's something that somebody else had. You want that too. And so coveting leads to fatigue. It leads to debt. It also leads to worry. You think you're stressed out? You're always worried all the time? I wonder if you could trace it back to a covetous heart. Ecclesiastes 5:12 says this, people who work hard sleep well, whether they eat little or much. but the rich seldom get a good night's sleep. Have you ever noticed that the more you acquire, the more you worry? The more stuff you have, the more you have to worry. First of all, the more stuff you have, the more you have to worry about, is my insurance going to cover all that? Am I going to have to get an umbrella policy to cover all my toys? And what is it going to do? But how, you got to worry about, how am I going to protect it? How am I going to save it? How am I going to invest it? How am I going to insure it? Or how can I avoid paying taxes on it? I gotta figure out the loopholes. How can I keep from losing it? It seems like the more that we have, the more we have to worry about. And that comes from coveting. The curse of the lottery is a good example, and that it is legit. I know a lot of us here, we're like, we want to pay it when it gets, we want to play it when it gets up to $500 billion, because that would be nice. When really, honestly, when it's at a minimum, it's like 12 million. Who cares, right? We want to win 500 billion. Because when I win that money, the first thing I'm going to do, and I hear this all the time, is I'm going to give it to the church. I'm going to give some to the church, because we are always going to do that. If we have $10, we won't. But if we have billions of dollars, we're going to give it to the church. But here's the reality is, it is well documented that if you win the lottery, there's a good likelihood you'll wish you hadn't. It is the curse of the lottery. It is real. These are just, if you just Google it, these are just some of the headlines. Lottery curse victims, 7 people who won big but lost bigger. The curse of the lottery, tragic stories of big jackpot winners. The curse of the lotto wins, quote, I wish it never happened, end quote. You see, Bud Post from Pennsylvania won $22 million back in 1988. Boy, that's nothing today, right? $22 million in 1988, and it ruined his life. His brother hired a hitman to kill him in hopes of getting his hands on his millions. The murder attempt failed. Then Bud was successfully sued by his landlord and his part-time girlfriend for 1/3 of his winnings. He blew the rest of it on terrible business deals, lavish purchases, and multiple marriages. Eventually, Bud was living on food stamps in order to survive. Bud said this, and I quote, I wish it never happened. It was a total nightmare. I was much happier when I was broke. In 2006, at age 66, 7-time married father of 9, Bud Post died broke and estranged from most of his family. Ecclesiastes 5:11, the more you have, the more people come to help you spend it. That's out of the Bible, folks. That's truth. So what good is wealth except perhaps to watch it slip through your fingers? And so when we covet, it leads to fatigue, it leads to debt, it leads to worry. And then here's something else it leads to. Conflict, tension, stress. We kind of hit on it. I mean, when you got a brother that's hiring a hitman to kill you so he can get his hands on some of the money, that's conflict. And coveting leads to conflict. James says this in chapter 4. What is causing the quarrels and fighting among you? Don't they come from evil desires that are at war within you? You want what you do not have. That's coveting. You want what you do not have, so you scheme and you kill to get it. You are jealous of what others have, but you can't get it. So you fight and wage war to take it away from them. That's coveting. Yet you don't have what you want because you don't ask God for it. And even when you ask, you don't get it because your motives are all wrong. You only want what will give you pleasure. You see, conflict comes with wanting more. It amazes me, and if you may be in the midst of this, you may have gone through this, you may have this to look forward to, but here's the one thing I've learned in dealing with lives, dealing with people, including my own family, that if there is a death in the family of a patriarch or a matriarch or someone who has some money or some resources, it is amazing how much tension, conflict, stress, and fighting takes place over how we're going to divvy that all up. Now, maybe you live in a family where it was just smooth sailing and everybody said, yep. But the reality is, I've seen it time and time again, this fighting stuff like, I always wanted that since I was little. I get that. That should be mine. I'm pretty sure that Mom wanted me to have that. I mean, she didn't tell you that, but she told me that. She wanted me to have it. Why should you get that? You never spend any time. When it was the end, I was the one taking care of her. I was the one doing all the work around her, so I should get it. I should be the one who decides, because you can't come waltzing in from out of town and all of a sudden tell us how to divvy things out. Does that all sound familiar? Do you know some friends, family? Because we all know some friends, right? And I know it didn't happen to any of us. But the reality is it brings conflict. I mean, the first murder recorded in the Old Testament was due to the brother Cain not liking what Abel had. You see, what Abel had is Abel had God's blessing. They both made sacrifices to God. But God seemed to prefer, give the endorsement, the gold star, to Abel's sacrifice. And Cain was upset about that. He wanted that. So what does he do? He knocks his brother off. All because of coveting. When you drill it down, coveting is a violation of the 10 Commandments. Now, a lot of us will say, well, okay, that's Old Testament. But again, we're a New Testament church. We're to follow Christ. So what does Jesus have to say? What's Jesus have to say about it? Well, here's what he says. And he was asked the question, of all the commandments, of the hundreds of commandments that are the commandments that we have learned, what is the most important? And Jesus says this in Matthew 22. First, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments. And what I think is brilliant is in those two commandments, Jesus pretty much sums up the entire 10 commandments. Because the first 4 commandments of the 10 are all about God. Loving him with all I got. But the final 6 is all about loving others. You're not loving others when you're murdering them. You're not loving others when you're stealing from them. You're not loving others when you're committing adultery on them. You're not loving others when you're not honoring your parents. And so Jesus says basically that all of this, whenever we covet, that is a major fail when it comes to obeying the commandment of loving our neighbor. Because we're not loving our neighbor. We're envious of our neighbor. We're jealous of our neighbor. I want what my neighbor has. I'm resentful of my neighbor. So how do we address it? Well, there's always an antidote. There's always a counter. And in this case, the way we battle coveting in our heart is contentment. Is learn how to be content. Because here's the interesting thing. You cannot covet and be content at the same time. You can't be content, literally, genuinely content, and coveting. You can't. And so contentment. Paul writes to the Philippians in chapter 4, not that I was ever in need, for I have learned how to be content for whatever I have. I know how to live on almost nothing or with everything. I have learned the secret of living in every single situation, having a lot, having a little. And I have learned that the secret of living in all situations, whether it is a full stomach or an empty stomach, whether it's plenty or little, and that is, I can do everything through Christ Jesus who gives me strength. Now, we think that helps us run faster. We think that makes us play sports better. We think that helps us to overcome obstacles because I can do all things through Christ Jesus who gives me strength. We quote it. It's on our T-shirts. It's on our coffee mugs. But if you actually put it into context, what Paul is saying is whether I have a lot, whether I have a little, I have learned the secret of being content. And that is Jesus. Because in Jesus, I can survive. In Jesus, I can make it. In Jesus, I can do all things, whether it's a lot, whether it's little, because I can do all things in him. And I have found the secret of contentment, and that is in Jesus. And it's amazing, if we have our eyes on Jesus, it's awfully hard to covet. And so Paul writes about that. So here's the thing. One, we need to stop comparing ourselves to others. I mean, stop it. We need to stop it. We need to stop comparing ourselves to others, and we need to be thankful for what we have. Because if you're sitting here right now, there's a couple things you can be thankful for right now, and that is you just took another breath. Your heart beat again and again and again and again. You drove here, or at least you had a ride, which means you had a friend or a family member who cared enough to get you here. I mean, we can start with the basics, and then we can tally it up. But the thing is we need to stop comparing ourselves, and we need to be thankful for what we have. You know, someone says if the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, you can bet the water bill is high too. Somebody had to spend a lot of money to water that. Of course, I've heard other things, and that is it grows over the manure and all that, whatever. But the reality is, I want what they have. You probably don't. Because if you could see below the facade, the Facebook image, I don't know if you'd want what they have. When we fall into the trap of coveting or comparison or even entitlement, we begin to say things like, well, why shouldn't I have as much as that person? Why do they deserve it and not me? I deserve this. After all I've gone through and all the work I've done, it's just not fair. It's not fair. And God's saying, okay, hey, if we're going to talk about fairness, let's just stop here for a second. Because if you're so concerned about fairness all of a sudden, well, I'll tell you what. I guess you could say I'm not being really fair to you. Because you don't deserve the mercy I'm giving you. You don't deserve the grace I'm giving you. You don't deserve the love, the unconditional love. You don't deserve any of this stuff that I'm giving you. So if you really want to play on that level playground, what about me? Compare yourself to me. Look what I've done. Who would you be? What would you be without me? And that's why Paul is saying, I've learned the secret of contentment. And that is Jesus Christ, who through everything, good or bad, gives me strength. So when we covet, it's idolatry, flat out. Because we're acting like, you know what, he's not enough to make me happy. I don't trust him. I'm not going to live like there's tomorrow. I'm going to get my neighbor's Chewy right now. I got to have it right now. And we're insulting God. We are doubting his wisdom. We are doubting his goodness. We are doubting that he actually has a plan for you. And you're so worried about it because it just doesn't seem to be working out in your life as well as it is with your neighbor. It is showing a lack of trust and faith in him. Paul Tripp says this, you can gaze over the fence and covet another person's life, or tell yourself that God has blessed you in ways that you never could have earned. The final thing is, and this is another antidote to coveting, is just being generous. You know, stop wanting things. Stop trying to acquire things. Actually start giving things away. Be generous. Give to others and refocus on the things that really matter, the things that are really going to last. Paul again writes in 1 Timothy 6, teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust in their money, which is unreliable. Can I get an amen? Their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all that we need for our enjoyment. Tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works and generous to those in need, always being ready to share it with others. Now, the word always there in the Greek means always. By doing this, they will be storing up their treasure as a good foundation for the future so that they may experience true life. You know, we grew up, again, learning from Sesame Street, which now that I have a granddaughter, I want to tell you, the same Sesame Street I was watching is still on. And Grover looks as good today as he did when I was watching it as a kid. And here's the thing, is what I learned from the Cookie Monster is I want more. Give me more, more. And I've just grown up to where I still want more. And here's what's interesting, is there's been studies done, and it doesn't matter where your wealth is, where you stack up in the socioeconomic scale, whether you have a little or you have a lot. Here's the interesting thing. A study was done, and the question was asked, how much would it take for us to have enough money? And remarkably, studies showed that most people, regardless of income, answered the question the same way. We need about 10% more. Everybody here, most of us would say, I just need 10% more and I'd be comfortable. Whether you make 30,000, 20,000, 300,000, a cool million, we would all probably answer, if I could just have 10% more, I would be comfortable. And I found that really enlightening when I stumbled across that, because as I shared a few weeks ago, all a preacher has to do to tick people off is to talk about giving or tithing or stuff like that, which a tithe in the Old Testament means a tenth. which means 10%. And so now I've figured it out. If all of us think we need 10% more to be comfortable, then no wonder we get really uncomfortable when God says we need to give him 10%. That's a 20% swing. No wonder. No wonder I get uneasy. No wonder I get uncomfortable. No wonder I get nasty letters or have people leave. Because if everybody thinks they need 10% more in order to be comfortable, in order to be happy, in order to be able to keep up with my neighbors, then when God says, you know what, give me 10% in Malachi and trust me with it, and I guarantee you I will blow your storehouses away. You will have so much you won't be able to take. When God says that, basically what he's saying is you can do it your way and want 10% more, or you can do it my way with 10% less and trust me. Trust me that there will be another Chewy tomorrow. Trust me that you can do all things through my son. Whether you have more or less, he will be there for you. And that's really what it comes down to, is trust. And it's hard for us to think of giving up and living on 10% less when really what we want is 10% more. And I just say this all the time, and I'm not trying to be smart alecky, but here's the thing. How is your pattern working out for you? How's it working for you, living your way? Why don't you just try to live his way, just once? And if you're like, I can't give 10%, I'm so much into debt, whatever, then give 1, give 0.5%. Just give regularly. Show some sort of level of trust in him rather than trust in ourselves. And again, I say this all the time. We don't want your money. It's all about what he talks about in 1 Timothy. He's going to bless us. It is not give to us, it's give through us so we can continue to be a blessing in this community, this region, and around the world, and for people who need it. And so the antidote to coveting is contentment, it's generosity. It's investing in the things that really matter, the things that really last. Treasures last. I want to invest in the kingdom because I'll be honest with you, the one thing I want more than anything is the people I love to be there. I want them to spend eternity with. And that's what lasts. That's what lasts. John MacArthur says this, the antidote for covetousness is contentment. The two are in opposition. Whereas the covetous, greedy person worships himself, the contented person worships God. Contentment comes from trusting God. I want to wrap up with this saying by C.H. Spurgeon. The more of heaven there is in our lives, the less of earth we shall covet. You see, the more of him we have in our lives, the less of this world we're going to want. The less this world I just got to have. The more of him I have, the less of all that I got to have. That's that secret of contentment. And as we close out this series, the interesting thing is the more of Jesus we have in our lives, the less proud we'll be, the less worrisome we'll be, the less dishonest we'll be, the less coveting we will be. Because when we become more like him, we become less like me. And so who are you becoming more like? I realize this series has been up in my grill. I got to prepare this stuff. So I'm spending a lot of time on it. And as I've always said, I haven't figured it all out either. I'm struggling just like you are. But here's the thing. As we've been working through these little sins that make a huge difference, I'm telling you what, that's tough stuff. But we're not going to figure it all out like that. It's who are we becoming? And becoming is a journey. Eugene Peterson talks about an obedience in the same direction. That is that long, slow journey of every single day becoming more and more like him. Because reality is, if you're not becoming more and more like him, then you're becoming more and more like something else. So it's either being more like him or more like whatever it is that you're using as your mirror. And so I just want to challenge us as we kind of wrap it up and we're going to sing. This has been a series, I know, that's been a challenge. We can leave here and say, all right, well, that was a good series. Let's move on to the next one. Or we can pray and ask God to forgive us. We we can confess that little sin that's become a big one in our life. We can trust him. We can find contentment in him. And so maybe for some of you, you need to repent, confess. Some of you need to give your life to him first and foremost, because he is really, the joy doesn't come in a Happy Meal box. The joy you're looking for comes in Jesus. That's the hole that you have in your heart, is Jesus. And for some of you who've come in here and you don't have that relationship, that personal relationship with Jesus, we can talk about that. We can talk about that. And so we're going to sing, and there will be people at both of these crosses that will pray with you, that will come alongside of you, would love to talk to you about what it means to become a follower of Jesus Christ. And I would just invite you to respond. So pray with me. God, as we've been through this series, there are so many things that we struggle with. And we can rattle off the 10 Commandments and say, I'm good there, I'm good there, I'm good there. But the reality is we're idolatrous. The reality is when it comes down to it is we can go from a healthy desire to coveting in a moment. God, there are so many other things that we have talked about, whether it be pride, whether it be worrying, whether it be gluttony, whether it be apathy. God, there's so many of those things that we struggle with, not only on a daily basis, but on a moment-by-moment basis. And it can be frustrating, and it can be overwhelming, and it can seem like an impossible task to be able to live and become more and more like you. But God, that is why you sent your son Jesus. Because he became our way. Because if it was up to us, we wouldn't find that way. We couldn't make a way. So God, I thank you that you sent your son Jesus Christ. And I pray right now that every single one of us will find our contentment in him and not in the things of this world. I pray, God, that we will become more and more like you. The reason we exist is because you're a generous God. You give us what we don't deserve, and more importantly, you gave us your son. You had him become that perfect sacrifice so that when we stand in front of you, we are covered by his blood. That we are perfect not because of us, but we are perfect because of him. So God, may we be more and more like him. And so I pray for each and every person here that they will hear whatever it is that you have had to say. And they will respond to whatever that is. I pray this in the name above all names, the name of Jesus.